Welcome to another Lazy Shell tutorial video. Today's topic is the Sprites editor. This is one of the more important editors this program has to offer. If event scripts are what stuff the game does, and levels are where the game does stuff, then sprites are who does the stuff. Let's start by talking about the structure of sprites. First, you have graphics, which are the pixels the sprites are made out of. Then you have molds, which are still frames. These are collections of graphics that are put together. And then last you have sequences. Sequences are collections of molds that, when put together, form an animation. At the bottom of that structure you have graphics. You can use this graphics editor to bring up a sprite's graphics. I talk more in depth about graphics editors in the Battlefields video, so you can watch that for an overview of how to use this. Next you have molds. Molds are still images that a sprite's animations are made out of. Molds themselves are made out of the subtiles found in the graphics editor. In the window on the right, you can use this grid button to see the subtiles that a mold is made out of. See, this top left subtile is 67. So if we pull up our graphics editor, go down to 67, see that this is right here, Mario's head. Of course, with this box here, you can change the subtiles being used if you'd like. Down here you have options to mirror the mold, invert it, or move it up or down by a couple pixels. Molds can be either a grid plane format, like this, what you see here, or what's called a tile map. Tile map molds are collections of tiles, which you can see here on the right. Similar to grid planes, you can select a tile and edit the subtiles within it. You can use these tools on the left to draw, copy, paste, and manipulate the different tiles. Tile maps give you a bit more space to draw bigger sprites, but it comes at the cost of processing power. You'll find that in testing out your game, the bigger the sprite, the more likely it is that it will look messed up. Note that it is harder to get a sprite to work in the overworld than it is in battle. To make sprites work for you, you can always use the Final Fantasy method of having a small overworld sprite with a bigger battle sprite, like Culex. Each sprite has room for up to 32 molds. You can add, delete, copy, and move molds using these buttons at the top. This button here lets you apply a universal pixel shift to one or all of the tile map molds within a sprite. This is handy if you find that in drawing your sprites, it seems to always be off-center. Down at the bottom are the sequences. Again, these are collections of molds put together to form an animation. Each sprite has room for 16 sequences. You can add, delete, copy, and move the sequences themselves using these buttons at the top. Also, this active box needs to be checked in order for the sequence to be used. I don't really get why sequences would need to be inactive in the first place, but know that this is a thing that exists. To the right of those, you have molds used. You can change the mold used and the duration in frames that the mold appears in the sequence. Then you have a series of buttons above that to add, copy, delete, and move molds within a sequence. Last, to the right, you have these buttons which let you test out what a sequence looks like. Back up to the top, let's talk about the properties of the sprites. Palette set is the color palette the sprite uses. BPP graphics offset is the location in the game's memory where the sprite's raw graphics data from that graphics editor are stored. An image is a collection of palette and graphics data. Different sprites can use the same image if one sprite doesn't have enough room for all of the molds and sequences you want to use. That's why ally characters typically have multiple sprites. Also, you can use the same image number to make different sprites that are palette swaps of each other, like terrapins and terracottas. You would use this palette box to adjust the palette being used. 0 uses whatever palette is in the palette set box, 1 uses the palette after that, and so on. This number only goes up to 7, which means that if you are using any of those palette swapped sprites, the palettes have to be somewhere within 7 palettes of each other. The colors used by the palette set can be edited using this palette editor. If you need help with palettes, I have a whole video dedicated to them. Over here we have the animation index. Animations are collections of molds and sequences. You can see from ally characters that, although some of them use the same image number, they use different animation numbers. VRAM size changes how much RAM is available for the sprite. If you've got a big sprite that needs more tiles in its molds, you can increase its VRAM size. 2048 is the smallest, and it goes up in increments of 2048, up to 8192. Okay, now that we've covered the basics, let's talk about importing custom sprites. This is the thing that I get asked about the most. I'm going through these editors in order. Sorry it took so long to get to this one. Let's start with an easy one, which is importing sprites from a Super Mario RPG ROM hack that already exists. First thing you need to know is that you need to use the same version of Lazy Shell to import and export the data, otherwise it won't work. Let's pull up a ROM hack here. Okay, let's say you really like this red Ninja Koopa sprite from this Super Koopa RPG ROM hack you found, which was made by some super talented, amazing, and handsome guy, and you want to use this sprite in your own ROM hack. Which, by the way, I'll say, is allowed. I only ask that you give me credit for my sprites, and tell me about your hack so I can play it. Anyway, there are 3 things that we want to export. There's animation data, which are the molds and sequences. It'll ask if you want to do the current one, or all of the sprites. You just want to do this one. Make sure you save it somewhere where you can find it. Press OK. There we go. Now we want to export the palette. Again, save it somewhere where you can find it. And last, we want to save the graphics. I should note, you can either use export to save it as a data file or an image file, or you can just save the image and import it that way later. Either of these options is viable. If you want to edit graphics in an image editing program, you'd want to save as image. Okay, now that we've exported what we need to, let's open up the ROM we want to import these into. Okay, we've opened back up our first ROM. So let's start importing these things. First thing is to go to the sprite that you want to overwrite. In this case, we want to overwrite Mario. So let's start with the palette. Then press OK once you've imported it. Looking good. And I don't know if that's an outfit choice I would go with, Mario. Next, we want to import the graphics. Again, you can either import image files if you used Save Image As, or you can import the binary file if you use the export feature. Okay, that looks like a Koopa to me. Now you can see that this mold already looks okay. That's because when I made this hack and I overwrote Mario's graphics, I tried to make it as close to the original as possible in terms of where the different subtiles were located, but it's not exactly a one-for-one. You can see that some of these other molds start to get messed up. So now we need to import the last part, which is our animations. Again, we're only importing a single index. Here's our sprite data that we saved. Press OK. And there you have it. We've successfully imported Red's sprite. Alright, let's undo these changes and talk about how to import things in a different way. Now let's talk about adding in custom sprites that don't already exist within a Super Mario RPG ROM. For example, let's say you created a few fun images of a red Ninja Koopa walking. Let's go up to Molds and import them. If you hold down Control, or whatever the Mac equivalent is, sorry, I don't know how to use Macs, you can select multiple molds. It'll ask you if you want to replace the current molds with these imported images. Yes, we're trying to overwrite Mario, so we want to say yes. It'll ask if you want them to be tile maps. Remember that tile maps are usually harder to get to work in the overworld, so I would suggest saying no. If you say no, the editor will use grid planes for what it can, and tile maps for everything else. Next, it'll ask if you want the editor to create a new palette based on the molds you're importing. You can choose yes, but I'll warn you that Lazy Shell doesn't always get it right. May still need to edit the palette manually after the fact. Also remember that a palette is limited in the number of colors it has, so your sprite can't be too detailed. Okay, so in this case the palette turned out okay, which is nice. But looking at the molds themselves, you can see that they're not exactly lined up right. Let's open up the tile grid. Take a look at our graphics. To try to mitigate this, to make the tiles look okay and line them up properly, you can use the Select tool to try to scoot the pixels over a little bit. It's going to take some trial and error, some practice to get it to look the way that you need to. Another thing you may have noticed is that there's a bit of redundancy in the tiles that were imported when we imported the molds. Do we really need 3 separate copies of the top of Red's head? When importing molds, the editor doesn't know to watch out for duplicated groups of pixels. This isn't the end of the world if the sprite you're importing has relatively few molds, but if you're importing a major character like this that's intended to overwrite one of the ally characters, you'll find that you can run out of space very quickly. Unfortunately, there's not really a good way around this. I can tell you what I would normally do is I would create my own graphics sheet that looks very similar to this, and use a separate image editor to edit it. What you can do is you can save this graphics sheet so that you have an image with the proper dimensions, and then you can edit it in a different program to create the subtitles you need. I understand it's not a great solution, but really, there's not an easier way to import more detailed custom sprites. Like I said, doing this importation that we've done works well enough for smaller sprites, but if it's something big with a lot of different animations to it, like a main character, that's when you need to start doing some of these more difficult things. I can tell you, I'm not much of a spriter, and making the Koopa Bros sprites was probably the most painful part of ROM hacking for me. I'm just not an artist, and yeah, it's not my thing. So sorry, but I don't have a better solution for you. But that covers things for the Sprites editor. As always, if you find these videos helpful, or if you just want to support the channel, please consider subscribing. Like I said, I know custom sprites are a popular subject, so if there's something you still have questions about, let me know and I'll see if I can help you. Till then, see you next time.